Everyone, thank you for joining us for today's installment of the REMI Client Series on Energy and Environmental Policy. My name is Dee Scott, Marketing Administrator here at REMI, and I have the pleasure of serving as your webinar host this afternoon. Today's guest presenter is Mr. Luis Nieves-Ruiz, Economic Development Manager for East Central Florida Regional Planning Council in Orlando, Florida. His areas of expertise include economic impact analysis, health and regional food system, economic planning, and industry cluster analysis. His professional and volunteer work has been recognized by Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Central Florida, the Wallace Center at Windrock International, NADO, ULI, Toastmasters International, Next City, and Leadership Florida. Mr. Luis holds a master's degree in regional planning from Cornell University and is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. Following the discussion, there will be an opportunity to have your questions answered. Please feel free to submit your questions in the Q&A submission portal at any time during today's discussion to be answered later in the presentation by our speaker. For your convenience, all registrants for today's discussion will receive direct access to the webinar slides and recording via a follow-up email. Please keep an eye out for that later this afternoon, as it will go to the same email address used to register for today's event. Without further ado, I will hand it off to Mr. Luis to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Dee. Welcome, everybody. Happy 2022. Today, I will be discussing a framework to assess the economic value of recreational assets using two different case studies that we recently worked on here at the Council. I always like to start all presentations by telling people a little more about who we are. The East Central Florida Regional Planning Council was founded in 1962. And is one of 10 similar councils of governments in the state of Florida. Our role is to provide technical assistance to local governments and organizations within our 8-county region. We also have a 3-year partnership planning grant with the U.S. Economic Development Administration that allows us to be the region's economic development district. I have been using REMI right now for almost 10 years, I will say. Being in the Orlando area, I have used the model extensively to estimate the economic impact of visitor expenditures and tourism projects. These experiences have allowed me to develop a set of best practices that can be used when developing the simulation variables and assumptions for this type of project. I will be using 2 recent projects to show some of the challenges faced when modeling the economic impact of recreational assets. And our first project was the Wekiva Valuation Study. In 2018, the ECFRPC partnered with the Friends of the Wekiva River to develop a valuation of the Wekiva River system to support the organization's advocacy on behalf of this natural asset. The Wekiva River system is considered one of East Central Florida's natural jewels. This natural system encompasses close to 41.6 miles of flowing river, 4 nature parks, and over 34 named springs. Despite most of the land along the river being a protected area, this fragile ecosystem is still threatened by the region's high urban growth rate. The new development in the region has increased the demand for water, which mainly comes from the Florida aquifer. This has in turn reduced the amount of water available to flow in the springs. In addition to this, the new development outside of the preserve has also contributed to the degradation of the river's water quality. The economic valuation of natural systems is usually the sum of what community members are willing to pay for it. However, the reality is that many of the environmental benefits provided by places like the Wekiva River are difficult to quantify. Therefore, the Friends of the Wekiva River wanted to focus on the value of the river system as both as a recreational asset. This required me to develop 2 distinct variables for the simulation: total visitation numbers and visitor expenditures. The economic impact of visitors is based on 2 main factors: length of stay and point of origin. Overnight visitors have a much higher economic impact because they spend more on goods and services than day visitors. Despite this important difference, the Florida State Park system did not have this information for most of the Wekiva parks. In an ideal world, The researcher would just have developed a survey and spend over 6 months taking feedback from the park visitors. However, this was not a realistic option for a project based on the budget and timeline. Therefore, I had to make several assumptions in order to develop this simulation. I decided it was best to assume that there is a similar visitor spread across all the parks, except for Rock Springs Run Reserve. I rate this one to 20% because the park is home to the Hammock House in the Wekiva River. This is a special lodge-style vacation rental property with a maximum occupancy of 10 people. Another challenge was to determine the number of day visitors for 3 private attractions located within the Wekiva River area. I already had annual sales estimates for these establishments through a private vendor. So my assumption here was that the average visitor expenditure that could be used to estimate the total number of visitors for these attractions. I developed the average visitor expenditure based on the availability of amenities and their cost for different parks. Again, there was no actual information coming from the parks other than total revenues. This means that for each of the parks, we have to kind of develop a different average expenditure number. Moreover, this required me to develop 4 visitor expenditure profiles to estimate the amount of money spent by Wekiva River visitors. These visitor expenditures were modeled differently. Out-of-area visitors expenditures were treated as exogenous production. For local visitors, the Central Florida Regional Planning Council used a reallocation spending. It is important to note that about 60% of the park visitors are local. Based on these variables, we found that we estimated that the Wekiva River system contributes 429 positions to the region, 51 million in output sales, 19 million in personal income. The park system also contributes 30 million to Florida's gross domestic product. Most of this economic activity is concentrated within the study area's 3 counties, Lake, Orange, and Seminole. Now we'll go on our second project, which was a little different. This was the development of a multi-use trail in the Florida Panhandle. The US 90 trail will traverse 3 counties, Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa. Our sister agency, the Emerald Coast Regional Planning Council, was recently awarded a grant from the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity to develop a master plan for this multi-use trail. It contracted with the ECFRPC to conduct an economic impact analysis that estimates the benefits of the building and operating this new trail. This project builds upon an existing initiative to create a connected bicycle and pedestrian network in Northwest Florida that will help to attract visitors and increase economic activity and quality of life in the trail adjacent communities. US 90's predecessor is the Old Spanish Trail, which communities would like to highlight as part of a recreational tourism draw for day trippers and overnight stays. This economic impact scenario was based on 2 variables. 1, the trail construction cost, and 2, the future visitor expenditure. The first step for developing this economic impact scenario was to estimate the capital cost of developing this trail. According to the Florida Department of Transportation, the total cost per mile for a 2-directional 12-share use path is a little over $326,000. Based on the total number of miles provided for the US 90 plan, the total cost to build the project will be close to $25.5 million. However, the most enduring economic impact of the US trail will be the result of visitor expenditures. Again, to determine the impact of trail visitors, I had to develop total visitor estimates. This proved challenging because each county has a tourism bureau office that takes a different approach to measuring visitation and expenditure numbers. There were also various gaps of information that needed to be resolved. For example, one of the counties did not produce their visitor numbers. Therefore, I had to use the amount of bedroom tax collected and the average length of stay of visitors to derive the total number of visitors for that county. According to one of the visitor bureaus, 14% of overnight visitors enjoy biking and hiking activities during their visits. After having conversations with the Emerald Coast Regional Planning Council, we decided to be conservative and lower this number to 10%. Only one of the counties had information about day visitors. So I had to use this figure to derive the number of day visitors for the other two counties. The overnight visitor expenditures were based on average business expenditures profiles developed by the different tourism bureaus. Based on previous experience, I can attest that this information does not change drastically from year to year. For day visitors, I assume that the average expenditure will be $23.64. This figure is based on a previous study prepared by the ECFRPC back in 2011, which surveyed trail users in the Orange County West Orange Trail. All visitor expenditures were allocated based on the profiles already developed by the different tourism bureaus. The spending categories were accommodation, food, entertainment, and miscellaneous retail. For modeling purposes, overnight visitor expenditures were treated as exogenous production. For local visitors, again, the ECFRPC used a reallocation of spending. So here are the results of the simulation. As a best practice, I decided to separate the construction and visitor expenditure impacts. According to REMI, the construction of the trail will create a total over just a little over 100 jobs, produce 30 million in sales, 5.7 million in personal income, and it will add about 7 million to the region's gross domestic product. The results of the visitor expenditure are reported as an average. According to REMI, the visitor expenditures will generate about just over 2,000 jobs, 162.3 million in sales, and 63.3 million in personal income across the three counties. It will also increase the region's gross domestic product by almost $1 billion. There are several lessons learned from these projects. First, while leisure and recreation industries are important economic engines, there's usually a dearth of data that could be used to develop the economic modeling variables. Not every project will have the budget and time frame to develop visitor surveys. That is very unrealistic. Therefore, you will be tasked with developing credible assumptions to fill some of these information gaps. It will be to your advantage to develop a strong relationship with the different visitor bureaus to obtain the latest visitation and expenditure data. However, this will not assure you that you will actually have good concrete data. So you will have to develop credible assumptions based on the information that you have available. Here's my contact information. If you have any other questions or I could be of assistance, I would like to thank the folks at REMI for allowing me the opportunity to share this work with you. Now, I would like to open up the floor for any questions that the audience may have.